Zariah Monroe walked into the courtroom, wearing her Sunday best, only to be mistaken for the defendant. She'd come to testify as a witness, but the bailiff called her trouble before she'd said a word. The judge didn't look up, just ordered her to wait outside with the others. But when she pulled out the letter with the state seal, everything went silent. What she revealed next would expose a 17-year cover-up and cost someone their robe. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The lights inside the Atlanta Graham Convention Center dimmed, casting a golden hue over rows of polished mahogany desks, each bearing the gleaming nameplates of America's finest high school debate champions. Polished shoes tapped against marble flooring, blazers creased with military precision. Whispers ran through the air, like thin wires of static. This was no ordinary high school competition. This was the National High School Debate Championships, the Super Bowl for teen intellects, where scholarship offers were whispered mid-match and reputations either ignited or dissolved. Among the sea of navy suits and pearl earrings, a single figure disrupted the pattern. Zariah Monroe, 17, dark-skinned, wrapped in a second-hand blazer, 2 sizes too big, and worn patent leather heels. Her natural hair crowned high in tightly defined coils, no name brand on her wrist, no team entourage following behind. Just her, a folder and a calm she wore like armor. The moment she approached the stage, it happened. A snort. Quick, sharp, slicing through the quiet, like glass underfoot. Then a cluster of chuckles. Someone whispered, "What is this, amateur hour?" The laughter wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was precise, surgical, aimed not at her argument, not even at her presence, but at her audacity. Zariah heard it, of course. She had learned how to hear everything, even the things not said out loud. She stepped to the podium with no tremble in her hand. But inside, a dozen old wounds began to throb again. Zariah Monroe had never belonged in rooms like this. Not by their definition. Raised on Chicago's South Side, 3 blocks from a shuttered elementary school, and across the street from a liquor store, her life had been a marathon of muted potential. Her mother, Yolanda, worked 2 jobs, overnight shifts at the hospital, and weekend cleaning at the university campus across town. Her father, a name she never learned to say without bitterness. Their apartment was filled with books from a thrift bin. Baldwin, Morrison, Dubois. She devoured them like gospel. In school, teachers often smiled at her like she was a burden with promise. They called her opinionated when she questioned lesson plans, disruptive when she didn't let classmates talk over her. One even recommended she consider more practical extracurriculars than debate. But Zariah never asked for permission to be brilliant. She trained alone. She transcribed YouTube debates on printer paper her mother borrowed from work. She read economic theory while folding laundry, practiced arguments in the bathroom mirror, and built her skills from pure grit. This wasn't just a competition. This was her proving ground. The theme for this year's championship was policy and power structures in 21st century America. Zariah's heart beat faster every time she read it. These weren't abstract theories to her. These were her lived experiences. But standing here, under chandeliers dripping with elitism, the stakes became heavier. Around her, students whispered confidently to coaches wearing Ivy League sweatshirts. Judges laughed warmly with prep school administrators. Zariah, she stood alone. Even before she opened her mouth, her name was already circulating on Twitter. Some inner-city girl just stepped on stage. This'll be short. Thrift store heels. Well now, who let her in here? Chicago girl's gonna embarrass herself. The tweets came from spectators, rival schools, even anonymous burner accounts that smelled faintly of sabotage. Still, Zariah inhaled, long and slow. She had memorized a quote from James Baldwin that rested quietly in the corner of her mind. "You have to go the way your blood beats. If you don't live the only life you have, you won't live some other life. You won't live any life at all." She looked up, met the eyes of the judges, and let her gaze hold for a second longer than comfort allowed. She wasn't here to be invisible. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice smooth and deliberate. "Today we debate the distribution of power in modern America. But before we argue policies, we must recognize how power speaks, and more importantly, who it silences." The room shifted. Students leaned forward. One judge tilted her head, intrigued. Another wrote nothing. But far in the back, a man with silver-rimmed glasses and a judge's badge leaned over to the person beside him. He didn't whisper low enough. "She's not going far," he said, chuckling. "She's not built for this stage." The camera cuts to a smirking judge whispering, "She's not going far." In her junior year, Zariah Monroe's voice felt like sandpaper scratches on glass. Uncomfortable, abrasive, unwanted. Every classroom she entered, teachers leaned in when white students spoke, offering nods of encouragement. While she was interrupted, glare met with dismissals like, "Not quite the tone we encourage here." She remembered Mrs. Thornton declaring her too aggressive during a debate club tryout. That word, aggressive, stung, as if ambition from a black girl were inherently threatening. It wasn't her words that offended, but the fact she chose to speak them. Day after day, classmates talked over her when she offered observations. Ecology, politics, poetry. She suggested improvements to group projects only to be told, "Let someone more experienced handle it." She learned early that her voice in those hallways didn't echo. It disappeared, yet she refused to silence herself. In that environment, Miss Calderon was an outlier, a soft-spoken Latina English teacher who wore earth-tone cardigans and carried a stack of dog-eared poetry anthologies. She saw Zariah, not as disruption but as promise. When Zariah submitted an essay comparing Baldwin to recent movements, Ms. Calderon wrote in the margin, "Your ideas crack open the room. Don't let anyone tape it shut." Nobody else used words like that. Calderon coached her after school. She introduced Zariah to public libraries across Chicago, where debate tutorials floated freely online. There in the echoing reading rooms under fluorescent lights, Zariah trained in secret on YouTube, lifetimes away from polished coaches and elite funding. She watched video after video, Ivy League competitors delivering flawless rebuttals. They rehearsed with personal coaches in hushed suburban manses. Their arguments were rehearsed to precision. Their lighting was cinematic. Their misguided confidence clipped fast. Zariah watched them admit facts, memorize policy abbreviations, deploy rhetorical techniques like dance moves. They performed perfection. She couldn't replicate their polish. She worked with grit, instead. Each evening, she sketched out arguments on printer paper, holding her breath to match the cadence she saw on screen. She practiced eliminating filler words, projecting calm fury, owning space. Without a school uniform coach, she became her own. Microaggressions trailed her in hallways like unwelcome footprints. Classmates joked about her hair, "Looks like hanging fruit," and though intended to elicit laughter, it hollowed something inside her. Teachers called her impulsive when she responded with fact-based challenges to textbook definitions that skirted racial bias. One guidance counselor even suggested debate as risky, better to stick with literature or community service. On social media, anonymous posts sprang up in the school's online forum. "Zariah acts like she's already on TV." Others said, "That girl's gonna get her hopes crushed at nationals." Every snide remark added weight to her resolve. She began building her voice not to be accepted, but to be undeniable. Every argument she practiced burned with emotional truth statements born from her lived experiences. Her aunt's deportation, the way her mother's overtime shifts felt like armor for her family, the cracked sidewalks of her neighborhood, where kids skipped school to sell snacks. She infused policy arguments with anecdotal evidence, turning theory into personal testimony. She sharpened her rebuttals into arrows aimed not at opponents but at complacency. In the spring of that year, something shifted. A regional qualifier approached. Miss Calderon quietly informed her. "They opened a wildcard slot. They've never extended it to our district before. Your case is strong. I'm sending your name." Zariah felt the ground tremble beneath hope. But when the official nomination went to Principal Hargrove, he recoiled. On the phone he said curtly, "We can't endorse her. Funds are tight. And frankly her style is unusual for our image." Zariah held her breath as he loosened his grip on the phone. She heard dismissal in his tone. Her name disappeared from the roster. Miss Calderon, however, didn't let it rest. She initiated petitions, rallied teachers who quietly donated funds, even started a small fundraiser at parent meetings. Zariah's classmates who once snickered at her appearance began to see articles from online debaters praising her potential. Chicago-born prodigy trains alone on YouTube. Uncoached, unmatched, her story surfaced beyond school walls. Microschools, library patrons, low-income community advocates donated to her fund, enough to pay entry fees, travel, minimal lodging. Zariah analyzed every bill, scribbled budgets in margins, held on to each penny as if it might vanish. When the nomination finally resurfaced, backed by school board intervention, spurred by media attention, the email arrived. National qualifier Zariah Monroe. Status: approved. Emotions flooded her chest: relief, fear, joy, exhaustion. But before celebration could settle in, Principal Hargrove summoned her to his office. He stood behind his desk, forced smile like iron bending badly to warm. He said, "I suppose you're glad, but make no mistake, one misstep, one misstatement, and our district will be judged. Don't embarrass us." His words were loaded. If she performed to standards, maybe, just maybe, her presence would be acceptable. Otherwise, she'd be erased. The tone implied limits placed on her voice, full of alarms about decorum over substance. Zariah stood, shoulders straight, emotion tense behind her eyes. She heard it not as a warning, but a threat. Yet something shifted. She recognized her own defiance there. She refused to shrink. The hallway outside Principal Hargrove's office was quiet, unnaturally so. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold tint across the trophy cases, filled with accolades that hadn't been updated in years. Zariah sat on the wooden bench outside his door, hands folded tightly in her lap, her backpack tucked under her knees. Her name was on the national debate roster. The school hadn't announced it. No bulletin, no loudspeaker shout-out, not even a whispered congratulation. Just this, a sudden summons to the principal's office, like she'd broken the dress code. The secretary gave her a tight-lipped smile that vanished the moment she looked away. The door opened. "He's ready." Zariah stepped in. Principal Hargrove stood by the window, back turned, looking out over the school courtyard like a general surveying a battlefield. He didn't turn around right away. "You know," he said slowly, "I had a student once who made it into the state science fair. Smart kid, quiet, followed the rules. We sent him straight to regionals." He turned finally, his smile wide but cold. "That's how you build a school's name." Zariah didn't blink. She knew what was coming. The bait was always the same. Soften her with pleasantries, distract her with small praise, then drop the weight. "We're in a tough spot, Zariah," he continued, sitting down. "There's concern from the board, faculty, and some parents about your participation in the national debate tournament." Her stomach tightened. "Concern?" He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. "This school hasn't sent a student to nationals in nearly a decade. It's a big stage, big visibility. We have to consider how we're represented." There it was, wrapped in polite diction, coded in academic neutrality, the coded message. "You don't fit the image we want." Zariah's voice was level, but her throat was dry. "You mean how I represent you?" He didn't deny it. "You're talented," he said, "but your style is unconventional, passionate, emotional. We worry it might reflect poorly on the institution if the judges interpret that the wrong way." "My style wins rounds," she said. "And you didn't say that about the cheerleaders who danced in a music video last year." His eyes hardened slightly. "That's different." "No, it's not." Later that day, she found Miss Calderon in her classroom, organizing a stack of poetry books like armor. Zariah didn't have to explain, her face said it all. "He said I'm not good for the school's image." Calderon's lips tightened. She pulled open a drawer and produced a yellow file folder. Inside were records, names, trips, expenses. "Let me show you what's good for this school's image," she said, flipping open the file. It was all there. Over the past 5 years, thousands of dollars had gone to trips and competitions for Model UN, robotics, drama festivals, cheerleading, even a culinary showcase in Los Angeles. The names tied to the funds were always the same. White students from higher income families, the safe bets. Not once had a student from Zariah's block received that kind of institutional backing. They funded students with lower GPAs, less commitment, and no national spotlight. Calderon said, "But you're too visible, you're too smart to be quiet, and that's what scares them." Zariah felt like the ground under her had shifted. "No," cracked. "So they'll just pretend I don't exist." "They already are," Calderon said, "but they're not going to get away with it this time." The next morning, a fundraiser appeared online. "Help Zariah Monroe get to nationals." A champion denied support. The goal was modest, $2,000. The description was simple and honest. It explained that Zariah had earned her place in the National High School Debate Championship. But her school refused to fund the trip. No embellishments. Just truth. At first, nothing happened. Then Calderon posted the link to a few teacher forums. Then a local education advocate reposted it. Then it hit Twitter. This Chicago teen trained herself in public libraries. Her school won't pay for her to attend nationals. Let's change that. In less than 24 hours, the numbers began to climb. $50, then $100, then a burst of small donations, $10 here, $25 there, from strangers across the country. A former debate coach in Texas posted, "I've judged national rounds. This girl's the real deal." By the third day, the total had soared to 2,200, and the comments poured in with it. "My daughter faced the same thing. Go get them. Zariah. I wish someone fought for me like this when I was 17. She's going to change the world." But with the support came whispers. In the teacher's lounge, staff questioned Calderon's agenda. On the school's Facebook page, subtle digs appeared. Why is this student getting special attention? We all struggle with budgets. Can't play favorites. Zariah read each one, felt the sting, then reminded herself. They don't hate my presence. They hate my defiance. At home, Yolanda stared at the fundraiser page late into the night. She barely spoke. The screen's glow reflected in her tired eyes. Zariah touched her arm. You okay? Yolanda nodded slowly. When I was your age, I kept my head down. Teachers said, "You're bright," but I knew they didn't mean it the way they meant it for other kids. She turned toward her daughter. You walk into rooms that were never made for us, and you speak like you belong. That's rare and risky. Zariah swallowed. I'm not trying to be a symbol. I want them to see I earned this. Yolanda disappeared into her bedroom. When she came back, she held a small jewelry box. Inside sat a modest diamond ring. I was gonna sell this when the heat got shut off last year, but we made it through. She placed the box in Zariah's hand. If something happens, if things go sideways out there, you pawn this, and you come home safe. Zariah didn't cry. Not immediately, but her hands shook as she closed the box. This wasn't just money. It was sacrifice. It was history. It was trust. By the week's end, the fundraiser had doubled. Media outlets picked up the story. Chicago teen overcomes systemic bias to reach debate nationals ran on regional blogs. A radio station called asking for an interview. Zariah declined. She didn't want to be a headline. She wanted to win. The school board, embarrassed by the coverage, released a vague statement. We support all our students and wish them success in all endeavors. But still, no money came from the school. No staff acknowledgments. No banners. Principal Hargrove, cornered, scheduled a brief meeting. You've made quite the splash, he said, tight smile back in place. Just remember, this isn't a solo journey. You carry the school's name with you. Zariah nodded slowly. I know exactly what I'm carrying. On her final day before departure, Zariah walked through the halls differently. Head high, eyes forward, she passed classmates who stared, some in admiration, others with suspicion. The building felt heavier now. Not because of fear, but because of awareness. Every corner of that school had tried to ignore her. Now it had no choice but to watch. She stopped at her locker to grab her note cards. As she twisted the dial, something fluttered to the ground. A folded note. No name. No handwriting she recognized. Just a sharp scent of cheap ink, and something sour. She opened it slowly. 6 words, scrawled in jagged, furious print. Don't embarrass us. Stay silent. The night before the trip, a threatening note is left in Zariah's locker. Don't embarrass us. The Marriott Grand Ballroom in downtown Atlanta glistened with chandeliers the size of small cars. Crimson drapes framed gold walls. Tables were adorned with sleek black nameplates bearing names from all corners of the country. Brentwood Academy, St. Augustine Prep, Lincoln Charter. The air was laced with expensive perfume, glossy resumes, and the kind of quiet ambition that had money behind it. Zariah Monroe walked in, wearing a blazer that barely fit and shoes her mother had polished the night before with kitchen oil. There was no team surrounding her, no matching school jacket, no coach leaning in with whispered encouragement. Just her, a plain black binder, and the quiet echo of her mother's voice. Make them hear you. Around her, students clustered in laughing groups, matching ties, embroidered school crests, travel mugs from private flights. She could feel their glances pass over her like inventory. Wrong shoes, too quiet, outsider. At the check-in table, a blonde volunteer blinked at her. Name: Zariah Monroe. The woman scanned the list, smiled a little too long. Oh, you were unaffiliated. I qualified independently. Through public wildcard. The pause was subtle, but real. The woman nodded, handed over a badge that simply read Chicago District 12. No school, no title, just a place. The first round was held in one of the side ballrooms. Velvet curtains blocked out sunlight, and the rows of leather chairs gleamed like courtroom seating. Each debate station had 2 microphones, digital timers, and water bottles bearing the tournament logo. Zariah took her seat. She was the last one to arrive. The room had already begun whispering about the matchup. Westview Prep. That's Harvard's farm team. Her opponent entered flanked by 2 assistants and a coach in a tailored navy blazer. Hadley North, age 17, daughter of a federal circuit judge. She wore a pinstripe pantsuit that looked professionally tailored. Her argument brief was color-coded, tabbed with post-its, and highlighted in 4 shades. Their topic, government surveillance in a post-terror world. Zariah breathed deeply, then glanced at the judges' panel. 3 of them. 2 men, 1 woman. The woman had kind eyes. 1 man looked bored already. The other? He was smirking. Not at her. Through her. Hadley spoke first. Her opening argument was pristine. Clipped diction, elevated vocabulary, and memorized statistics. She smiled between points like a newscaster. The room murmured its approval. Then it was Zariah's turn. She didn't use jargon. She didn't quote professors. She told a story. She began with a single line. When my uncle got arrested for a text message that wasn't even his, I learned what surveillance really means. Her voice didn't shake. She wove constitutional theory into real-world fear. She tied law to loss, rights to reality. She described community phone taps in Chicago, the way surveillance disproportionately targeted black and brown neighborhoods. She referenced data, yes, but not from textbooks, from local court cases, FOIA requests, watchdog reports. Every sentence was sharp, every transition clean. By the time she closed, the room was silent. One of the assistant coaches whispered, "That was brutal." Even Hadley, poised and polished, shifted uncomfortably. Zariah stepped down from the podium, her heart thudding, not from fear, but from release. She had said it all. The truth. Nothing dressed up for approval. When the judges returned, Zariah could already feel it. They avoided her eyes. The woman judge gave her a faint nod. The man with the smirk looked straight through her, his mouth pinched in irritation. The scores went up 2-1. Westview Prep wins. Zariah's breath caught. There had to be a mistake. She turned to her score sheet, clean across the board. Logical strength 9. Style 10. Argument precision. She had only lost in presentation decorum. A subjective measure. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Then she heard it behind her. A whisper. Too passionate. Too street. It was the judge with the smirk, murmuring to the coach next to him as he packed his papers. The words hit like broken glass against her chest. Too passionate. Too street. Not too wrong. Not too emotional. Just too much like herself. Zariah left the room slowly. Outside, teams were congratulating one another, clapping backs, exchanging post-mortem critiques. She walked straight through them like a ghost. In the corner of the lobby, she stopped. Her phone buzzed with a new notification. Zariah Monroe. Surprise wildcard shocks Westview. Then gets buried by judges. An anonymous debate blog had already written about it. The comments were brutal. She was all emotion. Policy is about logic, not life stories. She made it about race. Zariah clicked off her phone. Her throat burned. She found a chair in the hallway. Empty, quiet, and sat down. For 10 minutes, she said nothing. Did nothing. Just
Then a voice.
You should have won that round. She looked up. Standing a few feet away was a tall boy. Brown skin, dark curls tied back loosely. Wearing a gray suit with sharp lapels and a Yale pin on his chest. "Excuse me," she said, wary. He stepped closer. "I was watching. You dismantled her." The judges were biased. Zariah studied him. He looked familiar. Then she remembered. Julian Drake, the debate world's golden boy. Biracial, mixed race, son of a university dean, known for balancing liberal charm with conservative control. "I don't need your sympathy," she said quietly. He shook his head. "It's not sympathy. It's recognition. I've seen this before." She raised an eyebrow. "Before what?" "Before people who look like you start rising." He turned to walk away, then paused, reached into his binder, pulled out a slip of paper. "This isn't over," he said, placing it gently beside her. "Round 2 is where it gets real." He left. Zariah unfolded the note.
"You were robbed. Round 2 is where it gets real."
Julian secretly leaves her a note. "You were robbed. Round 2 is where it gets real." Zariah turned the note over in her hands, as if it might reveal more than what was written. The message was scrawled in fast, sharp penmanship, clearly written in a rush. "You were robbed. Round 2 is where it gets real." Julian Drake's name wasn't on it. But it didn't have to be. She'd seen the way he lingered after the match, the flicker of conflict in his eyes, as he watched the judges announce a verdict everyone in the room knew was wrong. Still, she didn't trust it. Not yet. She had grown up around wolves who learned to smile. Zariah slipped the note into her binder, exhaling tightly. The hallway was still humming with post-round chatter, but she heard none of it. Her mind was already dissecting every moment from round 1, every strength, every move, and every prejudice. She hadn't lost because she was wrong. She lost because she refused to water herself down, because her truth was too raw for a room designed to reward polish over pain. But round 2 was coming, and she wasn't done. That night, in her dimly lit hotel room, Zariah sat on the floor with her laptop open, and her argument brief spread out in front of her like a war map. The silence was broken only by the occasional blip from her phone. At 10:03 p.m., a message came through on a new anonymous email. Subject: "If you're serious about winning." Attached was a PDF titled, "Decoding Bias in Debate Scoring, Judges to Watch and How They Evaluate." She froze. It was from the same anonymous address that had once been linked to a leaked judging rubric, shared secretly among elite prep schools. No name, but the writing was familiar. Direct, technical, and just a bit sarcastic. Inside the document were detailed notes, which judges favored data over narrative, which had a track record of low scores for non-traditional cadence, which deducted points for speaking too quickly, unless it came from a white debater. And then, buried in the center, a handwritten annotation on a scanned ballot from a past match. Spoke clearly but lacked polish, too emotional, too casual. Final scores. Debater Maya Chen, Los Angeles Public Magnet. Judge M. Riddell. Zariah's jaw clenched. The same Riddell who smirked at her during round 1. This wasn't strategy. It was evidence. She wanted to delete the message. Part of her screamed, not to trust it. Julian Drake was still her competition. One of the best, Ivy League bound, the son of a university board member, someone who could afford to play savior if it made him look good. But the other part of her, the strategist, the survivor, knew that information was power. She opened the file. Somewhere across the hotel, Julian Drake sat in his suite, his phone screen dimming beside him. He hadn't signed the note. He hadn't expected her to reply. He wasn't sure he wanted her to. Julian had lived his whole life walking a tightrope between two worlds. His black mother from New Orleans who raised him on spirituals and truth-telling, and his white father from Connecticut who coached him to speak clean and keep his skin out of the conversation. He had passed for white most of his life, depending on the light, the haircut, the company. His father never told him to deny his roots, just to keep them quiet. When he debated in high school, judges praised his unbiased tone and universally appealing delivery. He understood what that really meant. You're not threatening. You know how to talk to us. You don't make us uncomfortable. But when he saw Zariah speak, unfiltered and searing, something in him buckled. She wasn't asking permission to exist in the space. She was carving space where there wasn't any, and they punished her for it. He couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. The next morning, Zariah woke before her alarm. The day of round 2, she ate a granola bar in silence, pacing her room, reciting opening lines. Her voice was calm but her gut twisted. The PDF from Julian. She had read it 3 times. Highlighted key phrases, cross-checked names on the judge schedule. It wasn't just helpful, it was critical intel. The kind of strategic preparation students at prep academies got from $400 an hour coaches. Now she had it too. But it came with baggage. She stared at herself in the mirror. Her natural coils were pulled into a bun. Her thrifted blazer pressed perfectly. Her hands clenched the binder. Do you trust the enemy who hands you a sword? She thought. Or do you fight with what you already have and bleed more for it? She didn't have the luxury to be proud. She only had the hunger. At 10:15 a.m., she walked into the round 2 room. It was smaller, more intimate, with only 2 rows of chairs for observers. One judge sat already, sipping from a thermos. Another flipped through her clipboard. Then the third one entered. Zariah's heart dropped. It was him. Riddell. The same judge from round 1. The one who had said she was too street. Her throat tightened, but her spine stayed straight. She nodded politely and took her seat. Her opponent, a boy from Willow Heights, blonde, wearing a school logo cufflink, sat down opposite her and adjusted his mic. The timer began. Zariah went first. Her opening wasn't fiery. It was lethal. Cold, measured, methodical. She quoted legislation, cited public case studies, leaned into statistics instead of story. She adapted, but her truth was still laced into every paragraph. The opponent stumbled by the midpoint. He had underestimated her, expecting passion, not precision, but Zariah had shifted gears. She played the game they respected, on the surface. Inside, though, she burned with every word she couldn't say. Every piece of herself she'd trimmed to fit. And from the corner of her eye, she watched Riddell scribble notes. Slowly. After the match, she stepped into the hallway, heart pounding. Julian stood nearby, leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets. He looked at her once, then looked away. She stepped toward him. "So that file you sent?" His eyebrows lifted. "Don't flatter yourself," she said. "It helped, but I still don't trust you." "I wouldn't trust me either," he replied. Then quieter, "But I wasn't wrong." There was a pause, tension so thick it could be cut. "Why do you care?" she asked finally. "You're going to win this whole thing anyway." Julian looked down. "My mom's black. Grew up in Baton Rouge. Got into debate too late. Never made it to nationals. Said she watched doors close that never even looked her way. She told me if I ever saw one open, I better not be the one to shut it behind me." Zariah looked at him, harder this time, not with suspicion, but with something closer to recognition. "Then don't be," she said, and she walked away. Later that afternoon, Zariah spotted Julian in the hallway outside the judge's lounge. He wasn't smiling. He was mid-argument with his coach, a tall, sharp-dressed man in his 40s who looked like he belonged at a Senate hearing. "You're pushing too hard," the coach hissed. "They're favoring the same 3 schools in every bracket," Julian said. "You saw the ballots. You know it." The coach's eyes narrowed. "You think anyone wants to hear that from you? You've got a shot at perfect ranking. Don't ruin it." Julian's jaw clenched. His voice dropped. "She's better than half these kids. And she's being set up." Zariah lingered near the hallway corner, pretending to scroll her phone, but her ears burned with every word. Her fingers closed tighter around her binder. When she returned to her room, the updated judge list for round 3 had been posted online. She clicked the link, heart pounding. 3 names. 2 were unfamiliar. The third? Riddell. Again. Her screen blurred. She whispered to herself, "They're really trying to bury me." A new judge on Zariah's panel. He's the same one who mocked her earlier. The room was still. Ballroom C at the Marriott didn't carry the grandeur of the main arena, but its smaller walls created an intensity that couldn't be ignored. The buzz of anticipation was everywhere. Folded chairs, echoing heels, judges with pressed suits, and silent pens. It all felt like a performance waiting for a verdict. Zariah sat alone at her assigned table. No coach beside her. No jacket with a school crest. Just a thrifted blazer, a binder, and a voice that had been sharpened like a blade against every door slammed in her face. The topic flashed on the digital projector. Resolved, the U.S. should significantly expand protections for undocumented immigrants. Her opponent, Sienna Mays, didn't react. She folded her notes with mechanical calm, adjusting the angle of her clipboard. She wore pearls, a tightly pinned bun, and a smile that bordered on condescension. Zariah's chest rose slowly. This wasn't a debate topic. This was her life. She remembered the morning her Aunt Letitia was taken. Zariah had been 9, sitting on the couch with a bowl of cereal, watching cartoons. Her cousins 10 and 12 were in the other room, still in pajamas. The knock was violent. 2 men in jackets that read ICE burst in like they were raiding a criminal ring. Letitia didn't resist. She didn't cry. She just kept repeating, "I did everything right. Please. I did everything right." Zariah never forgot the sound of that van door slamming shut, or the way her cousins screamed as their mother disappeared down the block, cuffed like a fugitive. Now, in this room full of judges and policy talk, they wanted her to be composed. But that memory wouldn't leave her throat. Sienna began first. Her voice was crisp, rehearsed, sterile. She quoted the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act, cited labor market fluctuations, and warned against overburdening social services. Her words were correct. Her tone was cold. Zariah watched her speak and thought, she's never had to explain her humanity to a system that already assumes she's legal. When it was Zariah's turn, she didn't rush the mic. She walked slowly, deliberately, and let her silence hang for 3 full seconds before she spoke. I was 9 the first time I realized paperwork was more powerful than people. The sentence landed like a dropped plate. Heads turned. Even the timer monitor froze mid-click. I'm not here to give you a sob story, she said, voice level. I'm here to tell you that immigration policy is not abstract. It's the reason children go to bed wondering if their mother will be there in the morning. She didn't raise her voice. She made it smaller, closer, as if forcing every ear to lean in. Her argument weaved personal story into public fact. She cited DHS reports, highlighted court rulings, and presented data from the Urban Institute, showing how undocumented black immigrants were 80% more likely to face aggressive detention practices. But she didn't just quote numbers, she humanized them. My aunt filed every form, paid taxes, showed up at check-ins, and still, one morning she vanished like she never existed. No appeal, no defense, just gone. Sienna looked visibly uncomfortable by midpoint. Her next round stumbled. She tried pivoting to national security, citing isolated border incidents. But it sounded disconnected, sterile. She referenced chain migration, like it was a term from a spreadsheet. When it was Zariah's turn to rebut, she didn't hesitate. You talk about burden. But what about the burden of being invisible? Of contributing to a country that will never admit you belong? How do you quantify that trauma? She closed her binder. No notes now. I don't need perfect diction to explain injustice. I live it. We all do, in different forms. But undocumented people, especially those who don't look like they belong in a campaign commercial, get erased first. She paused. And then the final blow. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm demanding policy with a soul. The room stayed quiet long after the timer beeped. The judges looked up, visibly shaken. One of them, a young woman with short curls, dabbed her eye discreetly with her sleeve. And then, slowly, the clapping began. First from the back row, then the middle, then all at once. It wasn't just polite applause, it was recognition. For the first time since the tournament began, Zariah was not just tolerated. She was seen. Judge's decision. The moderator announced, Victory Monroe, unanimous. Zariah stood motionless for a second, almost not believing it. She'd prepared herself for another punch, another disqualification masked as critique. But this was earned. She nodded politely, exited the room, and only when she reached the hallway did she allow her shoulders to drop. She didn't smile, not fully, but something in her chest loosened. A knot uncoiled. Back in her hotel room, Zariah sat cross-legged on the bed, her binder beside her, the glow of her phone screen reflecting in her eyes. She opened Twitter, and everything cracked. The first tweet had over 600. The street girl from Chicago used her sob story to guilt-trip the judges. Hilarious. Debate nationals. Then, she used immigration like a mic drop. This isn't trauma camp. And, imagine showing up to a policy debate with your aunt's deportation story like you're at therapy. One photo showed her mid-sentence, mouth slightly open, captioned, Miss your policy queen. LMAO. And then came the worst. A close-up still of Zariah, from the podium. Her natural hair, her deep brown skin, her intense eyes. Underneath, monkey see, monkey argue. Zariah dropped the phone. Her breath caught. She pressed both palms to her eyes. This wasn't critique. This wasn't academic debate. This was hate. Raw, masked in sarcasm, passed off as commentary. She had spoken from a place of truth, and in response, they hurled slurs from the safety of anonymity. Every fear she had felt walking into this tournament surged back. That she didn't belong, that no matter how polished her arguments, someone would reduce her to nothing more than a caricature. A soft knock came at the door. Zariah, it's me. Ms. Calderon. Zariah didn't want to answer. Didn't want to be seen like this. But Calderon had always shown up. Zariah opened the door slowly. Calderon entered quietly, holding a bag of takeout and a bottle of orange soda. I figured you hadn't eaten. Zariah sat down. She didn't speak. Calderon opened the food. Then, After a moment of silence, said, "They did this to another girl I coached years ago. Mexican. She won a state championship and got harassed for weeks. Said she was cheating by talking about her mother being deported. Called her a welfare case. Do you know what she did?" Zariah looked up, eyes rimmed red. "She showed up the next year, and won again. Then again." Zariah didn't speak. Calderon placed the orange soda in her hand. "You shook them today. They don't hate you because you failed. They hate you because you didn't." An hour later, Zariah's phone buzzed again. She almost didn't look. But the notification caught her eye. One of the tournament's major sponsors, Argus Debate Network, had retweeted a mocking post about her. It read, "Maybe next year we bring policy, not poetry." Their caption? "Interesting approach to argumentation. Not sure it meets our standards for academic excellence." Thoughts? Zariah stared at it. This wasn't a troll. This was institutional validation of mockery. The sponsors, the very ones who held sway over scholarships, coaching offers, career paths, had joined the dog pile. She wasn't just trending. She was being targeted. One of the tweets is shared by a major national debate sponsor. By 6:43 a.m., Zariah Monroe's name was everywhere. Not on a leaderboard. Not in an official email. But on timelines, in captions, under hashtags she hadn't created and wouldn't dare repeat. She sat alone in the hotel's breakfast lounge, staring at a half-eaten bowl of cereal. Her phone vibrated non-stop beside her. Notifications stacked like bricks on a collapsing wall. The tournament hadn't resumed yet. She hadn't even changed out of her hoodie. But online she was already on trial, by thousands of strangers who had only seen 90 seconds of her third-round argument. Cropped and misquoted, turned into viral content without her permission. A meme showed her mid-sentence, mouth open, with the caption, "When you're about to cry about your aunt, but realize it's not a therapy session." Another had her next to a character from a reality show, both labeled too emotional for prime time. Her throat tightened. She scrolled faster. Against her better judgment, she brought vibes to a facts fight. No coach, no class, all drama. Let's be real. She got in because they needed a diversity pick. She stopped breathing for a moment. Then came the trending hashtag, "Policy not poetry." Hundreds of tweets. From debate students, parents, some verified academics, and bots. What they all shared in common was a tone. Condescending, disguised as objective, but coded in something colder. Zariah wasn't being critiqued for her logic. She was being erased for her presence. Inside the tournament staff room, a private crisis was brewing. Screens were open to Twitter. Text messages came in from sponsors. An Argus representative had just called to express concern about the growing discourse. The room smelled like overbrewed coffee and fear. Gwen Marks, head of logistics, looked tense. "She's drawn too much attention. We're getting complaints. Some coaches are saying it's distracting their teams." A judge chimed in, arms crossed. "This isn't what debate is supposed to be." "What is it supposed to be?" Ms. Calderon asked from the doorway. All heads turned. She hadn't been invited into this room. She came anyway. They tried to wave her off, but her voice cut through. You didn't flinch when kids presented corporate tax policy with puppet props, or when that Westview prep kid quoted Churchill for 7 minutes straight. But one girl from Chicago makes you uncomfortable, and suddenly this isn't the spirit of debate. The room fell silent. She walked forward, slowly, dropping a folder on the table. "Let's talk about consistency. Here are past funding documents, participation reports, judge notes. Know what they all have in common. Every time a black student gets too far, too loud, too original, too visible, they're either pushed out or quietly sidelined." "No one's pushing her out," someone mumbled. "She's trending," Gwen said coldly. "It's complicated now." Calderon's eyes narrowed. "No, it's transparent now. That's your problem." Zariah sat outside the ballroom when she saw it. A retweet from Argus Debate Network, one of the tournament's biggest sponsors. They hadn't defended her. They'd reposted a meme mocking her opening statement. "Powerful moment or performance art? You decide." Captioned, "Interesting approach. Not quite what we expected from policy debate." The tweet had 40,000 likes. They hadn't tagged her, but everyone knew who it was about. That post unlocked a second wave of ridicule. Even students who had once cheered her at regionals were now silent, or joining the chorus. Zariah lowered her phone. There were no tears this time. Just a hollowness, heavy in her chest. But then something unexpected happened. Underneath the hate, a thread started trending. Let Zariah speak. Posted by Janelle Trent, a former debate champion turned civil rights attorney. I was 17 when I was told I was too urban to represent my school at state finals. I had perfect scores. They still benched me. Watching Zariah Monroe stand alone on that stage, I saw myself. You don't silence that voice. You amplify it. Within hours, others followed. Coaches, activists, Black educators, past competitors. They began sharing their stories, moments they were told to tone down, to speak slower, to quote more neutral sources, to stop being so themselves. One post read, "Zariah Monroe is not the exception. She is the echo of every brilliant voice that's ever been told to shrink." Back at the hotel, Julian Drake sat in his room, staring at the internal judge notes he had pulled from the database 2 nights before. At the time, he hadn't planned to share them. But now, he couldn't stay silent. He opened an anonymous email account and attached screenshots. Notes from a judge who called Zariah disruptive. Comments describing her as borderline activist. One suggesting she be placed against less sensitive opponents. He sent them to 3 people: Janelle Trent, a popular education journalist, and a youth civil rights org. Then he sat back. The email subject line read, "Bias is structured, not accidental." He never signed his name. That night, Zariah's phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't more hate. It was support. Hundreds of new followers. DMs from debate students she didn't know, thanking her, tagging her in posts where they shared their own painful experiences. "I dropped out after my coach told me to act less Latina. My first tournament, I was told my hair distracted the judges. I quit after being told my accent made me sound untrustworthy." Zariah stared at the screen. All these voices, all these stories, all this weight she hadn't asked to carry, but couldn't ignore now. The next day, as the judges deliberated for the next round, Zariah was called to the tournament's private lounge. She was escorted without explanation.
Ms. Calderon tried to follow, but was told, "This is confidential."
Zariah entered the room. 3 people were seated at the long table. One of them was Charles Devlin, the tournament's executive director. Gray suit, clean-shaved, eyes like polished glass. "Miss Monroe," he said, nodding slightly. She sat down, straight-backed, silent. He cleared his throat. "We want to begin by acknowledging the difficult situation you found yourself in." She didn't blink. "Found myself in," he smiled faintly. "The reaction online. The controversy. It's targeted," she finished. "And racist." There was a pause. "We're concerned," he continued, "that this level of attention is compromising the integrity of the competition." Zariah's heart pounded. "So because I'm the one being harassed, I'm the threat to your integrity?" "No one is accusing you of misconduct," he said smoothly. "We're simply exploring options to protect all involved." She leaned forward. "Say it clearly. Do you want me to leave?" His eyes stayed cold. "We're offering a chance to step back gracefully. We've had conversations with several sponsors. There are alternative opportunities, scholarships, fellowships. We can arrange private interviews with top schools." "You want me out," she said. Silence. Devlin smiled again. "We believe it would be in everyone's best interest." Zariah stood. "I'm not here to make everyone comfortable. I'm here because I earned it. You don't get to erase that." As she turned to leave, Gwen Marks called softly, "Wait." Zariah looked back. Gwen's voice cracked. "He's already drafted a statement, saying you voluntarily stepped down to focus on healing." Zariah stared at her. They had already prepared the ending. Even before asking her, she's called into a private meeting with the tournament director. The room wasn't just quiet. It was too quiet. The kind that made Zariah Monroe feel like her voice might bounce back with less weight than it deserved. The walls were beige. The lighting, soft but sterile. No windows, no warmth, just a long glass table surrounded by chairs too sleek to be comfortable. This wasn't a space for debate. This was a space for decisions. Power was always quiet like this. Charles Devlin, the tournament director, sat at the head of the table with 2 assistants on either side. He looked calm, polished. His silver tie matched his cufflinks, and his eyes didn't blink as Zariah entered. He didn't stand, didn't offer her a seat, but Zariah took one anyway. She placed her binder on the table with a deliberate thud, then folded her hands. She didn't speak first. She wouldn't give him that either. Devlin finally leaned forward. Miss Monroe, thank you for meeting us on such short notice. Her eyebrows didn't move. Wasn't a request. He offered a tight smile. No. But we appreciate your flexibility regardless. His voice was smooth, layered in administrative professionalism, the kind that covered sharp edges with softness. He continued, I want to start by acknowledging the attention surrounding your performance this week. It's been significant. Zariah said nothing, both positive and, unfortunately, controversial. Still nothing. You've sparked national conversation, he said. You've ignited meaningful dialogue. She tilted her head. You mean I made people uncomfortable? His smile thinned. You've changed the atmosphere of this tournament. Sponsors are weighing in. Some are threatening to pull future funding. Coaches are expressing concern over me showing up, she said, interrupting. Over me winning. Devlin clasped his hands. Let's be clear. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about the integrity of the tournament. Zariah gave a quiet laugh. No, it's about control. The assistants looked down at their papers. Devlin didn't deny it. He shifted tone. Here's what we're proposing, he said, leaning forward. Withdraw from the remainder of the competition. Quietly. We'll release a joint statement praising your leadership, your brilliance. We'll say it's for personal reflection, or to focus on advocacy efforts. Zariah stared at him. We'll include scholarship offers, he added. Mentorship programs. We can coordinate direct interviews with Ivy League admissions offices. You'll get access to opportunities most students can't imagine. He paused. You still win, Miss Monroe. Just off the stage. Zariah sat back slowly, letting his words soak the room. You want me to disappear in a suit. Excuse me? You want the graceful exit. You want me out before I take that final podium. Before I speak again. Because you're not afraid I'll embarrass myself. You're afraid I won't. Devlin's expression tightened. We're trying to protect you. No, she said, voice rising now. You're trying to protect yourselves. You let them mock me. You let a sponsor insult me publicly, and said nothing. You let judges rate me based on presentation style instead of facts. And now when I refuse to be quiet, you offer me a golden leash. He didn't flinch. She stood. I won't wear your silence like a medal. Think carefully, Devlin warned. We won't extend this again. I don't need your scholarship. I need the mic. And with that she turned and left. In the hallway, Miss Calderon was waiting, pacing like a mother before a verdict. She saw Zariah's face, and stopped breathing. What happened? Zariah exhaled. They want me to step down. Said they'd package it as dignified. Said they'd give me schools. Money. Access. Calderon sat down on the hallway bench. Slowly. And you. I told them to beat me the hard way. Calderon's hand went to her face. They're not used to that answer. No, Zariah said softly. They're used to people folding before the final round. There was a long pause between them. Then Calderon whispered, This is no longer about debate. Zariah sat beside her. It never was. They sat in silence until the announcement bell rang for lunch. Zariah declined. She couldn't eat. Her stomach was steel now. Back in her hotel room, Zariah opened her phone. She had 300 unread notifications. The Argus tweet still hadn't been deleted. Now even some of the less obvious accounts were attacking her. One debate coach from another state tweeted, This isn't a TED Talk stage. You want to inspire people? Do it on YouTube. Debate is about structure. Another post called her emotionally manipulative. But what stunned her more was the email. It came from an untraceable account. No subject line, no name, just a screenshot of her mother's address. Their home. Beneath it, 2 words. Come home. She called her mom instantly. Yolanda answered after the 3rd ring. Her voice sounded tired. Hey baby, did anything happen today? Anything weird? Her mom hesitated. There were 2 men standing across the street this morning. Not in uniform, just watching. They didn't say anything. Zariah's heart stopped. Did you call the police? I didn't even know what to say. They didn't do anything. Just watched. Zariah was shaking now. Mom, you don't have to protect me. I'll come home. There was a pause. Then Yolanda's voice. Steady but fragile. Zariah, do you want to come home? Or do you think you should? I don't know. I watched your last round 3 times, Yolanda said. And every time I saw the same thing. What? You weren't scared. You weren't even trying to be liked. You were trying to be heard. And they heard you. And that's why they're afraid. Zariah closed her eyes. Don't let fear send you home, her mother whispered. Let victory walk you there. The next morning, tournament security was posted outside the competitor wings, quietly, without explanation. The official reason? We're ensuring a smooth experience for all students. But Zariah knew what that meant. Containment.
Not safety.
Containment. She went downstairs to check the match list for semifinals. Students were crowding the boards. She pushed through, scanned the names. And there it was. Semifinal. Round A. Zariah Monroe, Chicago District versus Julian Drake, St. Mark's Preparatory. Her breath caught. Julian. The one who had leaked the judge bias notes. The one who offered help without credit. The one who stood between two worlds. And now stood between her and the final. People around her whispered. Damn. That's the match to watch. She's good. But Julian's legacy. Zariah backed away slowly. The walls of the hotel felt closer than before. She pulled out her phone. A text from Calderon had just come through. They saved the hardest round for you. But maybe that's because you're the hardest one to stop. Zariah finds out she's been placed against Julian in the semifinals. Julian Drake stood in the hotel's prep room, a perfectly crisp tie hanging loosely from his collar, as his coach spoke with urgency and venom behind him. This is the round we've been preparing for, the coach said, pointing at a whiteboard covered in bullet-pointed rebuttals. You don't leave anything on the table, Julian. She's good, but she's vulnerable. She's too reliant on narrative. Push policy, statistics, precedent, hammer her community bias angle. If she tries to turn it into another sob story. Julian's stomach turned. You want me to go after her race? He said flatly, not turning around. The coach hesitated. No one said that. But that's what you mean. Julian, the man said carefully, you have a future in law, in government, in real policy. She doesn't. You play this clean, but hard. That's how serious debaters work. That's how they win. Julian stared at the wall, fists slowly curling. His mind felt like a crowded hallway. Because somewhere inside, he still remembered a night from years ago. An image that had never left him. He was 10 years old. The night before his first school photo. His mother, Vanessa, had him sitting on a wooden stool in the kitchen. A straightening comb hissed softly on the stove. You'll thank me later, she whispered, gently parting his curls. He winced as the heat kissed the edge of his scalp. Why can't I just go with my hair how it is? She smiled faintly, not looking him in the eyes. Because they'll see you before they hear you. And if they don't like what they see, baby, they won't care what you say. He didn't understand it then. Not really. But now, as he stared at a folder labeled Zariah Monroe Counterpoints, he did. Julian walked alone to the semifinal room, binder under his arm, mind unraveling. Zariah was already seated, chin high, face calm. She nodded when their eyes met. No smile, no tension, just readiness. The moderator welcomed them with the ceremonial energy reserved for highly anticipated matchups. Semifinal Round A. Topic: Urban Policy and Educational Inequality. Julian felt his chest tighten. He knew exactly where this was headed. The moderator continued. Resolved. Major U.S. cities should implement performance-based funding to improve educational equity in low-income districts. Julian took a breath. He knew what the judges expected. He knew the strategy laid out for him in black and white. Dismantle the emotional argument. Drive a wedge between performance and funding. Spotlight personal bias. Strip her narrative. Keep it clean. Win. He stood, adjusted his tie, and delivered his opening statement. Policy must be surgical, Julian began. It cannot be guided by anecdote or shaped by guilt. Performance-based funding doesn't punish, it incentivizes excellence. Districts that achieve more, receive more. That is not cruelty. That is competition. That is American meritocracy. His words were measured, his tone confident. He cited New York's funding models, San Francisco's tech charter incentives, and a Rand Corporation study that labeled need-based subsidies economically unsustainable. He didn't say her name. But his argument was designed for her shadow. Zariah didn't flinch. When she stood, she didn't bring papers. Just her voice. Incentives work when everyone starts at the same line, she said softly. But some of us begin 10 miles back with weights around our ankles. She moved slowly around the podium, addressing the judges, then the students in the back row. I went to a school where we had one working science lab, and 3 times the police presence of the wealthier school 4 blocks away. We couldn't afford new textbooks, but the performance charts expected us to outrank districts with robotics clubs and AP calculus. She paused. That's not meritocracy. That's cruelty repackaged. She pivoted into evidence: federal audits of school budget discrepancies, national teacher attrition rates in urban zones, psychological impacts of underfunding. She didn't raise her voice once, but she held the room like a preacher who didn't need a pulpit. Julian watched her and felt his arguments begin to crack inside him. Not because she was wrong, but because she wasn't new. He had known kids like her growing up. Kids who didn't get debate club. Kids who only had one shot and used it without apology. He had spent years learning how to blend, code switch, win without making noise. But here she was, making noise that shook ceilings. And for the first time in years, he envied someone else's courage more than his own comfort. Midway through the round, during cross-examination, Zariah asked Julian a question. You talk about incentivizing excellence, she said, but how do you define excellence in a district where the only way to make the top of the class is to survive the week? Julian paused. The room waited. He could have pivoted. He could have given the memorized answer. But he didn't. He looked her in the eye, and then turned to the judges, and said, I can't. The moderator blinked. I'm sorry. Julian cleared his throat. I can't answer that honestly without admitting that her argument is the one grounded in reality, not mine. A murmur rippled through the room. I've been trained to value the systems that gave me access, but I've also been protected by them. And she's right. Performance isn't universal when the floors under your feet aren't even. He turned to Zariah. Your city deserves more than spreadsheets. It deserves justice. Zariah said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. The round closed without closing arguments. The judges huddled. The crowd stayed silent. Minutes passed. Then the lead judge returned with a clipboard. He looked at both debaters. This match is ruled a tie. A deliberation decision will follow. Another gasp. Ties were rare, almost unheard of. Julian looked down, unsure whether he felt relief or regret. Zariah stood still. Her hands trembled. Just barely. But she hid them under the podium. Because now the question wasn't who was better. It was what the judges would do with a match that couldn't be controlled. The judges are stunned. The match ends in a tie. The silence that followed the judge's announcement was too sharp to be confusion. It was disbelief. A tie? Zariah had seen plenty of wins, plenty of losses, but never this. Never a match so surgically judged that it ended in deadlock. Especially not at this stage, not this high, and never involving someone like her. For several seconds she didn't move. Neither did Julian. The moderator leaned in again, clarifying with careful diction. A 1-1 split with one judge abstaining, due to conflict of interest. Per protocol, the tie goes to extended deliberation. A decision will be announced publicly within the hour. Zariah felt the room tilt. The abstaining judge had been the only one who smiled at her as she walked in. The only one who hadn't taken furious notes. Now even her silence felt strategic. She left the room without applause. Julian followed behind, his expression unreadable. Behind closed doors, the judges erupted. Voices rose. Fists struck tables. Policy manuals were opened and slammed shut. This is a disaster, one snapped. The entire internet is watching this match. I'm not giving it to her because of media pressure. It's not pressure. It's justice. She earned it. Earned it? The first judge scoffed. She's a firebrand with a sob story. That's coded. Another warned. Call it what you want, he said. We set a precedent here. We're rewriting how debate is scored. What happens next year? Everyone cries and gets a trophy? She didn't cry, the woman judge snapped. She convicted the room without raising her voice. That's more than half these kids ever manage. The door slammed behind the fourth judge as he walked out. Then the fifth, leaving three judges, one decision. No manual could fix that. Outside the conference floor, the hallway had transformed. It started with 3 students, one from a New Jersey public school, one from Oakland, one from a small charter in Detroit. They held homemade signs written on notebook paper. Let her finish what she started. Fair debate or favoritism. Zariah belongs here. Within an hour they were joined by more students, parents, alumni, coaches who had stayed silent until now. By noon, the hotel lobby had become a protest corridor. Reporters showed up. Cell phone videos went live. Twitter erupted again, not in backlash but in defense. Let Zariah finish began trending in 3 states. One of the most viral posts came from Julian himself. He stood outside the ballroom, surrounded by cameras, and spoke clearly. "No one asked me to say this," he began, "but it needs to be said." He looked straight at the lens. "I was told directly and indirectly to go after Zariah Monroe's identity, to treat her story like a flaw, like a weakness, like it disqualified her from being objective. I was told to use her city against her skin, her passion, everything that makes her powerful." He swallowed hard. "I didn't, because that's not debate. That's cowardice with a time limit." The post gathered 1 million views in 4 hours. The tournament board issued a rushed statement. "We are committed to fairness and do not condone identity-based targeting within the debate format. Mr. Drake's claims are being taken seriously." But it was too late. The dam had cracked. Zariah didn't respond publicly. She didn't need to. Her silence echoed louder than any press release. 3 hours later, the deliberation door opened. The head judge stepped out. She looked exhausted. Her collar was askew. Her pen had run dry. The lobby went silent. Reporters raised mics. Students froze. After extended discussion, she said, "The judges have determined that both participants in semifinal round A, Zariah Monroe and Julian Drake, will advance to the final round." Gasps, cheers, cry. Some clapped. Some walked away. But Zariah just stood still, as if the floor beneath her wasn't done shifting. Julian turned to her. "It's yours to win now." She nodded once. "No. It's ours to shake." Later that evening, the final debate topic was posted on the tournament website. It was simple. 11 words. Black letters on a white background. Resolved: racial identity and power in American institution. Zariah read it once. Then again. And again. Each time, the words felt heavier. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because, for once, they had given her permission to say everything. The final topic is revealed. Racial identity and power in American institutions. Zariah Monroe sat frozen in the lobby, just long enough to steady herself before stepping into her own reflection. In a mirrored wall, the topic racial identity and power in American institutions scanned across her mind again, each word resounding like a call. Her heartbeat didn't speed, it aligned. This was not just a theme, it was blood memory. This was the heart of what she had always known. That American power structures were built to exclude her, not to hear her. That every institution she'd confronted, from schooling to debating, was more comfortable when she remained unseen. Now the tournament had thrust this truth into the center. They believed it would reveal her. Instead, it gave her permission. Back in the executive suite, the organizers sat in pale tension. "This doesn't stay academic," Gwen Marks said quietly, fingers tight around her coffee cup. "This is going to expose." Charles Devlin adjusted his cufflinks. "We picked something neutral. Racial identity feels academic." Marks shook her head. "It feels academic only if you're white enough to ignore the pain behind it. This topic lets her bring it, uncensored." Silence. "We misjudged." Devlin's voice lacked its usual polish. "This might crack the set." Meanwhile, Zariah returned to her room. Her eyes landed on her binder, still weighted with pages, notes, printed articles. But tonight, she would write something different. Something raw. She shut her laptop, turned off the lamp, and opened a fresh notebook. Her pen paused over the first line. "Power wasn't built for someone like me, and when I stand under its arches," she wrote. The words came in waves. She wrote about high school counselors calling her too ambitious for scholarships, as if ambition were only okay for certain faces. She wrote about her Aunt Letitia's arrest, how she devoured debate training videos with notebook margins full of Baldwin quotes, how teachers told her to tone it down because her voice didn't look like authority looked to them. She wrote about Ms. Calderon, the only teacher who ever told her she belonged, asked her to read Baldwin in class, lent her sports papers, coached her after school, even when the principal threatened them both. Each sentence was excavation. Every paragraph, confession. She wasn't crafting policy. She was indicting the very rooms built to judge policy. Around midnight, Julian knocked softly. She opened the door. He didn't speak. Handed her a folder. Color-coded analysis. Judge patterns. Historical scoring quirks. The kind of playbook Ivy League teams publish. He looked anxious. "You don't need this," she said. "I know, but I thought I still think the system won't let you win just on truth." She closed the folder. "That's your problem, not mine." He lingered. "If you want a listener before tomorrow, here." She nodded. He turned and left. Zariah returned to her seat at the desk and read. Then discarded. Kept writing. By 2 a.m., 10 pages were full, lines bleeding from her pen across the corner margins. The uniform courtroom logic wouldn't suffice. She wrote with voice. Personal, fierce, undeniable. She invoked history and memory and uncovered how institutions treat black identity like risk instead of richness. By 3:45 a.m., she stopped. Her hands shook. Her chest hurt. She realized she had built a story, which, if spoken out loud in that ballroom, would divide the room, make her enemies uncomfortable, empower her allies, shame everyone else. She whispered, "I'm ready." Before dawn, a consistent but chilling reminder appeared. A text from an unknown number, followed by an image of her apartment still, with a caption, "Nobody wants to see this." A second, a message reading, "You won't finish tomorrow." But by 6:30 a.m., she stood beside Ms. Calderon at breakfast. Miss Key's lips were tight, but her eyes held something resolute. "You've built yourself a microphone," Calderon whispered. "Now speak like you own it." Zariah nodded. By 7:15 a.m., Zariah walked down the hallway toward the final room. The carpet muffled her steps, but she felt every tremor underfoot. The lobby had started filling again. Smiling students in matching jackets, pleased coaches, nervous volunteers. But she walked straight to the door and paused. Her reflection blurred in the glass. Unsnapped blazer, worn heels, her notebook in her hand. She breathed. She knocked. Inside, the audience was seated. Chairs aligned like pews. Cameras in the ceiling. Judges behind a wide table. She took her place at the podium. Opened her notebook, but then closed it. She'd memorized everything. She didn't need the pages. The moderator said the usual. "In the event of new evidence of bias, conduct, or testimony in this round." Zariah heard none of it, because inside, she was already stepping into a cathedral of truth. Before her, the morning of the final, her hotel room door is vandalized with racial slurs. Zariah Monroe paused at the threshold of the final debate chamber. Every fiber of her poised. This was no longer competition. It was reckoning. She stepped inside like she belonged. Unlike her past rounds, today the judges, three at the front desk, were fully visible. No anonymity behind screens. No smirks she could dismiss. There they sat, composed, professional, power in collars, and crisp shirts. She looked at each one in turn, woman on left, man in center, younger judge on right, and held their gaze just long enough to claim space. The audience hushed immediately. Coaches straightened. Cameras clicked. When the moderator called the final round, every syllable echoed in the chamber. Zariah approached the podium, wore quiet confidence opposite glaring stage lights. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled. The silence settled like slow flames. She began. "They tried to burn me down. With small words, with sideways glances, with applause only when convenient. They expected ashes. Instead, she paused, letting the weight sink in. They turned me into light." Every word was deliberate, but musical. Fire wasn't just metaphor. It was material. She painted the complex line between pressure and purification, arguing that forced brilliance only exists when real challenge meets unquenchable truth. Her structure deftly intertwined history and humanity. She referenced Brown v. Board to sketch a timeline of institutional power. She used data from NAACP archives to trace patterns of suppression. But she didn't stop there. She spoke of lived consequences. Her Chicago neighborhood, the deportation of her aunt, the silent corridors that never echoed her ambition. For every policy point, she offered personhood. "It's not enough to debate what systems can do. We must interrogate who they leave behind, then ask why." Her voice didn't tremble. It wielded precision. Audience members shifted in their seats. Some wiped eyes quietly. Others leaned forward, captivated, not by the privilege of wins, but by witnessing someone who refused erasure. A few rows back, Julian watched as if tethered by gravity. Guilt and pride mingled. He knew he couldn't repeat what she said. He could only amplify it. When she stepped away from the podium, he rose to speak next. Julian's tone had changed. Gone were the rehearsed lines and technical discipline. Instead, he spoke with sincerity flowing from years of conflicted identity. He acknowledged his own privilege. He owned the bias of his schools, the echoes of his white father's mouth telling him to speak softly, invisibly. He praised Zariah's righteous rage, not as weakness but as truth. "Her fire didn't catch me. It convinced me. And now I stand not against her, but beside her. He embedded additional stats and structural challenges, institutional segregation, inequities in school funding, but each framed in the context Zariah had provided, rooted in experience, amplified by intellect. Together, they built a logical and moral crescendo. When Julian concluded, the room remained silent, not because they didn't understand, because they were too moved to react. Zariah returned to the podium for her final line. She didn't shout. She didn't whisper. You gave me silence. I gave you thunder. Silence exploded in the room. An emotional thunderclap, large enough to shatter decades of complacency. Then came the applause. As she walked to the back room, judges re-entered deliberation chambers. She stood outside, hands clasped, hearing every muted exhale. After what seemed like an eternity, a judge emerged. She walked to the podium and dropped a folded scorecard. It drifted to the floor, landing at Zariah's feet. She knelt, picked it up, opened, saw the numbers, 10 across every category. Perfect. The room broke into hushed gasps. A perfect score, nearly mythical. Zariah looked up. Julian's eyes met hers. The judges watched her approach. The audience held its breath outside the curtain. A single score, perfection, delivered by the same institution that once smirked at her for being too street. A judge drops her scorecard. It has a perfect score. Zariah Monroe emerged from the deliberation room, into a sea of applause. The atmosphere was electrified. Coaches, students, and strangers showered her with admiration. There was no muted cheer. It was a standing ovation born from collective recognition, not polite protocol. She stood, still, letting the crowd's energy wash over her. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, her binder felt heavy in her hand, not from the weight of paper, but from the gravity of what she had just accomplished. This wasn't just victory, it was redemption. But victory was never quiet. 20 minutes later, the judges re-entered the public hall and took their seats at the elevated dais. The lead judge tapped the microphone. Silence followed. The first judge opened half a binder, breathing steadily, like a general before he delivered a decisive order. The murmured conversation ended. The judge called out. After 40 minutes of deliberation, Zariah's chest tightened. The audience leaned forward. The judge exhaled. We have a champion. He paused, letting the tension deepen, knowing the weight of the announcement. National debate champion, Zariah Monroe of Chicago District 12. The hall erupted again. Shouts, tears, hugs. Zariah stared at the head judge. Perfect scores in hand. Her binder still clenched, her shoulders straight. This time they couldn't erase her. Her mother, seated in the second row, collapsed into tears even before Zariah turned to her. The woman's shoulders shook as she fell forward, burying her face in her hands. Yolanda had come all the way to Atlanta, with sacrifice woven into every breath. 2 jobs, endless emotion, unseen anxiety. Now she was openly weeping. Not from relief, but from vindication. People around her offered tissues, murmured comfort. But she just sat, tears streaming as if each drop carried the weight of every doubt ever cast at her daughter. Zariah watched her briefly, then stepped forward. She knelt beside her, wrapping strong arms around trembling shoulders. Quietly, they shared the unspoken truth. They had survived. Back in the judging room, inside behind closed doors, whispers grew into discussion. Let's just say it wasn't unanimous, one judge said quietly. But it happened. Another spoke softly. Argus will be furious. They were banking on a unanimous upperclassman. This is narrative tornado. The lead judge looked at the folded scorecards. We followed the rules. She earned it. And any attempt to override would implode. A third voice chimed in. If sponsors threaten uproar, legal comes down hard on this committee. Silence followed. Because prestige was less powerful than precedent. In this moment, a small group decided they couldn't risk moral bankruptcy in favor of a safe outcome. Outside, sponsors whispered rumors. In hushed channels, executives exchanged notes. She only won because of trending. It's diversity theater. Better cut it off. At least one senior sponsor quietly reached out to the tournament head to suggest they issue a neutral statement. Keep policy, not performance, it read in the email. But that message never went public. Instead, Devlin took to the stage again. Standing alone under the glare of lights, he composed himself. His voice trembled initially, yielding to authenticity. We didn't expect this narrative to build, he said. But adversity is what debate is meant to explore, not avoid. He cleared his throat. We stand by our decision, not because we wanted this narrative, but because she earned it, fairly, fully. The room burst again with applause. But the media's narrative had already shifted. The moment her name was announced, news outlets began resetting the frame. Major headlines read, Debate Nationals crown teen attention grabber. Diversity over substance. Zariah Monroe, victory or viral spectacle. Champion or showcase. The performance of pain at Nationals. Each article cited the Argus retweet. Each framed her story as emotional spectacle, rather than intellectual triumph. Each questioned whether her success was merit or marketing. People who had never heard her arguments began to undermine her voice using clickbait tropes. Later, in her hotel room, Zariah watched her win transform into rhetoric. She opened Twitter. The tide of criticism was less furious but more insidious. I'm all for inclusion, but she did more posturing than debating. Loved her story, but debate isn't open mic night. Her aunt's deportation was tragic, but what's the plan beyond Payne's story? Juxtaposed with the supportive posts. She didn't just win. She rewrote the rules. A black girl, who doesn't apologize. Thank God. Keep watching. This is just the opening act. The emotional currents were opposing. One pulled her toward invisibility. The other lifted her to influence. Her mother entered quietly, carrying water and takeout. Zariah let her mother sit beside her in silence. Her mother didn't say anything. But she didn't need to. She offered presence instead of pity. That evening, Zariah was told she had an invitation. An email subject line had arrived. Interview invitation, national live television. It was from a major news network, with a reputation for aggressive interviews. The kind of anchor who lured guests in with praise, then spun them with confrontation. Zariah held her breath. It was a moment, a national platform, a chance to expand change. But it could also break everything she'd fought for. She turned to Miss Calderon, who looked at her with fierce calm. This is your moment, Calderon said. But it could also ambush me, Zariah said. Calderon nodded. They roll cameras and expect gratitude from you, even if they plan to tear your truth apart. But whatever happens, it's still on your terms. Zariah read the invite once more. Primetime interview. Host Erica Templeton, known for tough interviews. Live audience. One take. The email ended with, RSVP within 24. Zariah closed her eyes. Should I do it? She asked her mentor. Calderon answered without hesitation. Speak louder than the doubts. Say yes. Zariah opened her laptop again. With trembling fingers she wrote back. I accept. But before she could hit send, she paused. She connected to video call with Julian. He answered, I want you to know whoever that anchor is. They'll ask you the hard questions. They'll push you to doubt yourself publicly. Don't let them define your value. Zariah exhaled. Thank you for everything. He looked off camera for a moment, then said, just remember that room in Chicago, that blood promise. Stay rooted in that. She nodded. I will. The next morning, Zariah checked her phone again. At the top of her messages, another alert. Confirmed interview on Templeton tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. Below it an article link, not from advocates but from a mainstream platform. Champion or controversy. How a viral underdog won nationals, but lost the narrative. Its subheader screamed, Erica Templeton grills teen debate champ live tonight. No safe spaces here. Zariah stared at it. She was a champion, but in some corners, already turned into spectacle. Yet here was her chance to recast that on a public stage where laughter and rhetoric clashed. A major news outlet invites Zariah to a primetime interview, but with a hostile anchor. Zariah Monroe sat in the makeup chair under harsh studio lights, heartbeat steady but unmistakable. Today wasn't debate. It was narrative. National. Live. Unedited. She wore a simple suit jacket, no thrift logos visible, hair pressed back in neat coils, nothing flashy, nothing distracting, just readiness. When the producer whispered stand by in 30 seconds, she inhaled slowly, then exhaled. Live. The camera counted down. Here. Host Erica Templeton appeared on screen. Polished, poised, voice clear as glass. Tonight, she began, eyes piercing through the teleprompter glare. We have a remarkable guest, national debate champion Zariah Monroe, a young woman whose performance ignited applause and outrage in equal measure. She paused. Zariah, some say your win was inspiring. Others say it was diversity theater. One commentator wrote, "Are you just a symbol? How do you respond to that?" Zariah looked calmly into the camera. "A symbol?" she repeated. "Symbols are decorative. I am flesh and story. If winning this championship turned me into a symbol, then maybe it's time we evaluate which stories we've treated as decor." Her tone held clarity, not anger, but cutting precision. Templeton arched an eyebrow. Decades of norms suggest debate shouldn't be emotional. Were you playing to emotion? To narrative? Zariah didn't flinch. She leaned forward. Debate is about argument. And argument includes context, lived experience, values. If narrative scared you, then you weren't listening to the facts underlying it. The studio flickered with silent beats. Templeton shifted. "Some say policy is about substance, not trauma memoirs. Critics argue your speech depended too much on personal pain. How is your message scalable?" Zariah met the question head-on. No retreat. Policy without empathy is mechanical. It doesn't see people, it sees metrics. We need both. Structured reform and human insight. If my words moved the judges, it's because reform works better when you humanize those systems. Templeton pressed again. "Claims about your family history, your city, your identity, they resonated. But does that overshadow the arguments of others who come from less dramatic backgrounds?" Zariah paused. Her calm never cracked. "I'm not the only one whose life is dictated by broken systems, but I'm the one with the microphone right now. Every injustice I described: underfunded schools, ICE raids, unequal funding. These aren't personal anecdotes. They're patterns. My truth is data lived, evidence walking, to silence that is to silence the system." The camera lingered on her face. Templeton paused, as if regrouping. She leaned forward. "You were offered a deal to step down, to accept scholarships quietly. Why did you refuse? Not just debate, but freedom." Zariah's eyes softened in thought. "Because taking their deal would mean surrendering the sound of resistance. I could have walked away with comfort, but comfort is silence in disguise. I refused because I refused to let them define my power." There was a beat, broadcast dust settling. Templeton leaned back, impassive. "Nobody said you had to stay." "Exactly," Zariah answered quietly. "Nobody said I belonged either." The host glanced at the monitor. "But you stayed, you competed, and you won. At what cost?" Someone sent threats. Social media pushed backlash. Zariah looked directly at the camera, not at Templeton. "If living truth costs you comfort, you paid in value. And if threats are the answer to visibility, then all the more reason, eyes must stay wide." Templeton interrupted. "That's brave. But isn't there a risk in being so visible so early in life?" Zariah smiled gently. "There's risk, yes, but risk is also responsibility. I survived long enough to tell the truth. That isn't bravery. That's duty." Across the country, views soared. Clips from the interview spread. Zariah speaking sharply, Templeton's eyebrows arching, captured reactions spotlighted. News articles framed the exchange as a turning point. Teen Champ reframes debate and identity. Monroe took the mic and reshaped the narrative. And stories followed. One leaked email from Argus executives since went public. "Cancel the rest of this series. We're losing control." But that mattered little to Zariah. Within 24 hours, multiple Ivy League schools emailed her admissions offices with offers, signed scholarship letters, invitations to summer programs, both merit and leadership tracks. But along with them came renewed threats, anonymous emails, calls to her mother, messages demanding she tone it down. One email included a screenshot of her school's database, showing her final average in classes, with a note, "We know where you study. We can find you." Local police were notified. A campus SWAT team offered escort options. Her mother declined. She told Zariah she traveled too far to be quiet now. Meanwhile, the National High School Debate Association reached out. Formal email. Official letterhead. They offered Zariah a position on their newly formed teen advisory board. The first time they invited a high schooler, they called her a visionary and requested her help shaping policy for equitable school representation in national debates. They wanted her voice. That night, Zariah sat with candles on her desk, reviewing messages. DMs from middle school students, teachers, even former opponents sent encouragement. She replied to a few. Her phone pinged with a call. It was Julian. "I saw the interview," he said, voice thick. "You carried it. They didn't get one corner." "I had to," Zariah replied softly. I couldn't risk half-truths. There was silence. I'm proud of you, he continued. She nodded to herself. Zariah closed her laptop and looked at the ceiling. She had navigated the debate stage. She had faced institutional erasure. She had dismantled stereotypes live on national television. And now she had a choice. Keep building in public or retreat into caution. Then her phone buzzed. Another invitation. From a congressional aide. Request for testimony before the U.S. House Committee on Education and Labor. Subject line: Need your voice on equity in American schools. Zariah is invited to testify before Congress about equity in education. September 24, 2025, 9:00 a.m. sharp. Zariah Monroe stepped into the cavernous hearing room of the U.S. House Committee on Education and Labor. The marble walls glistened under harsh overhead lighting. Senators sat behind a semicircle of dark wood, their expressions unreadable. Cameras recorded every angle. Reporters lined the back wall. The air hummed with anticipation. But Zariah didn't see the grandeur. She saw purpose. Across 2 years and 1 viral debate, victory. She had prepared for a moment like this. Not to perform, but to dismantle. The chairwoman peered at her from behind thick glasses, her gavel resting in front of her. Ms. Monroe, she began, voice measured. We have heard your testimony will speak to systemic inequality in public education. Will you proceed? Zariah nodded. I will. When she spoke, she didn't waver. Members of this committee, I stand before you not as a symbol, but as evidence. Her cadence was deliberate. Each sentence reinforced her lived truth. She recounted budget gaps. Her high school allocated $20 per student annually for classroom materials, while suburban districts had over. She described how standardized testing inherently penalized underfunded schools, and how college admissions often subtitled potential with privilege. Inside the chamber, a few senators shifted. Some leaned in. We need legislation, she pressed on. Not to adjust our compassion, but to rectify our systems. She proposed 3 bills by name. One directed to expand Title I flex funding. Another establishing grant support for proven but underfunded debate programs. A third protecting students from retribution when they speak truth in educational settings. She paused to let the weight sink in. One senator, lean and narrow-eyed, rose to question her. Ms. Monroe, your speech echoed a personal narrative of hardship. Yet Congress crafts policy based on broad data, not individual story. Are you asserting your story should shape national legislation? Zariah met him directly. My story is not unique. It is shared across countless communities and backed by data. When systems erase the data behind the person, you silence the evidence, and then there is no truth left to legislate. A third senator spoke, softer. You heard critics call your championship win diversity theater. Do you still believe systemic change can come through debating? Not protests, but policy? Zariah looked around, shoulders steady. Yes. Because democracy distorts when we only debate the privileged. When rhetoric excludes resistance, reform stalls. Debate done right, especially these fields built for grids and algorithms, must make room for people whose brilliance was never meant to fit. The committee exchanged quiet exchanges. Nobody questioned her strength. When her testimony concluded, the representatives retreated into private deliberation. The audience murmured. Zariah exited quietly. Later that evening, press releases confirmed 3 new education reform bills introduced following hearing. Senator author herself praised Zariah for being a catalyst for reform. News headlines emerged. From debate champion to policy pioneer, one high schooler demands Congress defend brilliance, not regulate it. Meanwhile in Chicago, Zariah's high school reopened after renovations. Inside, the debate room had a shiny brass plaque, Monroe Debate Room, where silence became thunder. Her former principal, Dr. Hargrove, was no longer listed. A new principal had been quietly appointed over the summer, an educator whose first conversation with Zariah had been an apology. In the debate room's mirror-polished desks, she glimpsed young students studying, reading on prepared topics, the same room where she once waited in hallway corridors to practice solo. She turned and guided Miss Calderon inside. The teacher's eyes welled up. That evening, Zariah announced a new initiative, her own scholarship fund, the Monroe Voice Fund. Its mission to support Black and underrepresented girls in debate programs across Illinois public schools. She outlined seed donations, partnership with local libraries to host debate clinics, and mentorship pathways to assist students without access to elite coaching. Registration emails poured in. Local alumni donated. National board members from debating organizations pledged matching grants. It wasn't just fund creation, it was building infrastructure where none existed. Victoria, a 13-year-old black girl with braided hair and bright eyes, watched Zariah's announcement on her phone. She taped her speech note cards against the living room wall, reciting after Zariah phrases like, "My silence was not consent. I belong, and I am recognized." When she practiced for her school debate tryouts, her mother whispered from the hallway, "I saw her speech. She's your model now." Thousands of miles away, Zariah's presence rippled. Back home later that evening, Zariah sat in her childhood living room, with family photos on the mantel. Her aunt and cousins, Yolanda with hospital scrubs and early morning light, Ms. Calderon holding group photos from library debate prep sessions. Zariah exhaled and said quietly, "I never wanted applause. I just wanted justice to fit me instead of me fitting silence." Her mother nodded, reaching over. They sat in silence that felt like centuries. Just then her phone buzzed. A new headline had emerged. "New girl steps on stage. No one laughs anymore." The article showed a young black girl, probably 15, walking to the podium at a citywide debate. The audience was silent, respectful, no giggles, no sideways stares. The caption read, "Inspired by the woman who proved what happens when silence turns to thunder." Zariah stared at it. A breath caught somewhere inside, then exhaled. Fade to black with real headlines of black students facing modern educational racism. Inspired by true stories, still happening today. They thought her voice didn't belong in their courtroom. They were wrong. Because truth doesn't need permission. It just needs to be heard. If you've ever been silenced for speaking up, you already know her fight.